Hello, this is Ken Ferrie with this week's Boots in the Field report. Was on the road last week doing grower meetings. Had a great one out in Grinnell, Iowa with the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Group. Kathy Lentz and her crew do a great job rounding up sponsors and putting this meeting together every year. It was held at the Key Co-op in Grinnell, Iowa. This year marks the 16th year I've been doing this meeting. Great bunch of farmers out there every year in attendance. It's kind of like home week when I go out there, as I've got to know a number of the farmers in this group. It was a day-long workshop, and these guys are not afraid to ask questions. While many questions were asked, the one that I'd like to touch on in this podcast has to deal with rootworm. We hear more and more stories about rootworm problems coming out of Iowa. Everything from product failure to trait resistance. Talking with those growers last week, they're trying to get their arms around the issue as they're dealing with gooseneck corn and silk clipping issues. While the issues of rootworm resistance to trait is growing here in Illinois, it's a much bigger issue in Iowa. The question is, when will Iowa's troubles come to Illinois? The issue in Iowa is a multi-pronged problem. First, they deal with two rootworms. The western rootworm, which we're familiar with here in Illinois, the beetle with the stripes, and the northern rootworm. The main rootworm that I see in fields in Iowa is the northern rootworm beetle. The northern rootworm beetle has the ability to do extended diapause, which means when it lays its eggs this year, not all of them will hatch next year. Some will wait to hatch the following year, and some have been delayed as much as 5 years. This makes crop rotation a somewhat useless tool in their toolbox. If the northern rootworm develops resistance to your insecticide or your trait, it becomes a challenge because you don't have crop rotation to help you. Iowa also deals with the western rootworm like we do here, which is also a problem because they can migrate to the bean fields and lay their eggs. We call it the western variant. As we've seen in our plots, this egg laying can go on till late August. We have seen here in Illinois, the western variant will move out of corn and pumpkin fields and lay their eggs in neighboring bean fields. Now, this is usually triggered by the condition of the pumpkin field or the corn field that they were in. If disease takes down the pumpkin field, they'll migrate to neighboring green fields, corn or bean fields, giving us a halo of rootworm damage around the pumpkin field the following year. While Iowa had resistance issues before 2020, the derecho of 2020 made it worse. When that corn went down, most likely western rootworm, still laying eggs, were on the move for greener pastures. With no corn standing, they left the cornfields and went to the bean fields to lay their eggs. So not only were they dealing with the northern rootworm from the previous years due to extended diapause, but they're also now adding some of the western variant eggs into their bean fields from last year due to the derecho. This pressure is not only causing goosenecking in the corn, but a number of acres had to be sprayed because of silk clipping. The rootworm problems will not go away for the Iowa farmer anytime soon, and the aftermath of the derecho is still at work. When a 250 bushel corn crop gets blown down, there's no way around it. You're going to have volunteer corn. Many growers had to spray volunteer corn as much as 3 times and still didn't get it all. This allows the eggs laid in those fields last year to hatch and survive on the corn roots. The surviving beetle then lay their eggs back into that bean field. We don't put nitrogen on volunteer corn, but nitrogen is a big part of hybrids' ability to build proteins, and the Bt traits are expressed in the proteins. So even though this volunteer corn is traded, it will be weak and allow resistant and moderately resistant larvae to survive. For growers to get ahead of this resistance, they need to keep good records. Which traits were in that field and what insecticides were applied, not just last year, but the previous year as well. Rotating traits and insecticide is a good idea to stave off resistance. Yearly use of sticky traps in the corn and beans to keep a track of the beetle populations. On a sticky trap, I think northern should be counted as 2. Yearly rootworm digs to evaluate rootworm damage. Take those pictures if you need to, and then compare them from year to year. Is the damage getting worse? Talking with one grower last week who had goosenecked corn in first year corn that he had also sprayed for silk clipping, wondering what lies ahead. Well, with gooseneck corn, we know the beetles he sprayed were homegrown and are resistant to whatever trait or insecticide he used. He's going to need to mix it up. One grower said they're pretty sure their problems are coming from a neighboring corn-on-corn farmer who continues to deal with gooseneck corn and heavy pressure. His question was how far to rootworm move. We know from our pumpkins at least a half a mile. If it has also been stated that they can move as much as 2 miles. In this case, when a neighbor is fighting rootworm issues, it would be good to find out what control method he is using because he has resistance and the beetles are moving from his field to your field. They're going to carry that resistance and you will need to do something different. When we find more and more resistance issues here in Illinois, it's usually a neighborhood problem, meaning that one field develops resistance and then it moves to neighboring fields. Here in Illinois, it usually centers around a corn-on-corn grower not mixing things up enough. In Iowa, it can happen in rotational corn as well. When will Iowa's rootworm issue come to Illinois? I'm not sure. But one thing that showed up this year in too many fields was northern rootworm. Again, this is that green beetle. We have northern here, but western is the main one we deal with. It's not uncommon to only find westerns in a field. This year that changed in fields north of Bloomington. I was shocked to not only see the northern, but for them to be the dominant rootworm in some fields. Watching sticky trap reports, we could see this migration for some time. The heaviest trap catches of northern are in the northwest corner of the state along the Iowa border. This year I noticed increases in northern rootworm in fields as far south as Bloomington, and it has me puzzled. I don't know how to prove it, but I wonder if derecho going across Iowa and northern Illinois didn't blow some in here. The other factor that I'm sure will show up next year is how quick corn died in the heavy tar spot areas. I expect green soybean fields next to those dead cornfields to receive the eggs laid in August last year. Especially fields next to corn-on-corn fields not sprayed with fungicide or insecticide that went down fast in mid-August. As growers, we got to stay on top of this because the EPA has taken away all of the rescue tools to deal with this pest. Once we see larvae feeding, there is no rescue. Pest teams, let's double down on our rootworm sampling this year. Start recording whether the beetles you catch are northern or western as well. And maybe doing some more rootworm digs so we can stay ahead of this before we're dealing with the gooseneck issues they are in Iowa. Everyone needs to tend to the crop in the bend as spring temperatures start to climb. If you want that bend to stay cool, you need to seal up those fans and vent those roofs in the evenings. Keep an eye on surface crusting and the smell of crop going out of condition. Boys, she is worth too much. The pest team out there, as always, we need your help to track this year's cutworm and armyworm moth flights. We'd like to see our moth traps go out by the end of March. So call or email the office and we'll get you the lures and or traps if you need them. All we ask is that you text in your moth counts every few days. As we prepare for this year's crop, let's keep our fellow Ukrainian farmers in our prayers. With the potential loss of their crop this year, the world food supply is going to be in a world of hurt. The market is telling you it needs as much grain as you can produce. And the world is depending on you to step up and fill the gap our brethren in Ukraine can't. Let's take a tip from Homer this year and swing for the fences. A lot of people across the globe are counting on you. Soil testing crews are knocking down the spring testing acres already. Make sure your spring testing orders are turned in. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.